Did you know there's a natural law of science that points to a supernatural force?
No, I didn't know that, but that's only because that's the most ludicrously insane thing I have ever heard in my whole goddamn life, you mustachioed dumbass. Here's the thing about natural laws. They exist within nature. They reflect nature. They are things about nature. And if it's natural, then by definition, it cannot be supernatural. And anything that can be studied by science is natural, regardless of whatever label you want to put on it. It's like saying that mathematics points to the work of William Shakespeare. It just doesn't make any sense. Which, by the way, is not really what science does either. Science follows evidence to its conclusions. It doesn't point and say, hey, look over there at that thing, wildly jabbing its fingers towards some idea, without actually demonstrating that thing, which is definitely not about to happen.
Yup, this natural law is known as the law of conservation of matter and energy.
Seriously. A description of the universe as we understand it totally points towards anything other than that's how the universe works as far as we can tell. Listen, you can, and I guess probably will, assume, or more likely presume, that proves the thing that you already believe. But I could just as easily say, well, the existence of those rules proves that Tony, the simulation chief of Universe 4657, decided to put that in place. Or that it proves that's how universes have to be. Or that it's a demonstration that no one needed to put it in place, therefore God couldn't possibly exist. But all of those are assertions based on a piece of evidence that doesn't support any of them, including, if not especially, yours. Isn't that cool? Not sure what it means though. Of course your lot always know what everything means. That's why atheists are the arrogant ones, yeah? Wait.
This natural law states that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed.
More or less. They can, however, be converted from one to another and back again. That's kind of the point. Although again, this is an observation about the world around us. As much as you want to say, aha, supernatural boys away, it could also mean that energy, at least, is just a forever thing that's always been around. I mean, the before the Big Bang concept, for some reason always called by your lot as nothing, is actually infinitely dense energy. And you know the thing about infinitely dense things tends to be a lot of it. Enough to maybe last forever.
Let's just focus on that first part. What does it mean that matter and energy cannot be created? It means that something cannot come from nothing.
Define nothing. Go on, I fucking dare you to define nothing in a way that makes sense and is scientifically useful. I'll bet you can't. The thing about nothing is that most things described as nothing are almost always not nothing. Like, even if the outside of the universe were devoid of anything else, it would still contain a universe. And that's all assuming that any concept of nothing is even possible, which is something that we currently just don't know. Also, here's a fun thought experiment. If you were to look at nothing, so you had it in a jar somehow, what color would it be? If you answered anything other than, I don't know, well done, you're full of shit.
But Professor, if matter can't be created from nothing, then where did our universe of matter come from?
Butt Professor. Seems about right. And who the hell is this asshole talking to the Butt Professor? Oh, right, butt. Makes sense. Also, how disingenuous is it to invent a cartoon professor in order to spout your pseudoscientific garbage as if you have any legitimate authority whatsoever? It would be like if I started describing the exact details of the Crusades as if I was there just because I'm a cartoon crusader. I couldn't do that because I was not there. I was extremely drunk from 1096 to 1291. So drunk, in fact, that I ended up sleeping through the whole of the 100 Years' War after that as well.
According to this natural law, nothing natural could do this.
According to? The fuck are you talking about? All natural laws are is observations of how things work in the universe right now. They are descriptions of what we have seen and likely will see. But they aren't necessarily indisputable, unbreakable facts. I mean, the Big Bang broke all kinds of things that we would now describe as natural laws. And yet that's also a thing that science absolutely says happened. So both things can be true at the same time. Also, again, even if you're right, the conclusion isn't immediately magic man doodad. The conclusion is, that's weird, I wonder how it works. And all we can do is hypothesize about it and test those hypotheses. But we shouldn't make grand sweeping statements, especially about things that aren't backed up by anything else as well.
It's the law.
No, again, it's an observation. It appears to be how it works. But in science, many things have appeared to be the case only to be overturned after a new discovery has come along and demonstrated a far more accurate and, more importantly, useful understanding of how whatever thing works. So we changed how we thought about it from there. No scientific idea is a law like the don't fucking kill people law is a law. It's not saying, you can't do that, you naughty boy. It's just, here's how we think it works, at least for now.
Wait, are you saying this natural law means there should be no matter?
Holy fucking shitballs, no! It's saying there is matter, and there's not much you can do about it. If anything, the only conclusion you should come to from there is matter, and there also was matter before now, and matter will probably continue to be a thing, is that matter is just kind of there. The assumption that there had to be a point where there was no matter is no more stated by the law of conservation of mass and energy than it says that whiskey is the best drink and you should give it all to me. Although, to be fair, that last one is at least true.
But Professor, clearly we're here.
Well, you weren't here 2 seconds ago, and why the fuck did we need a second asshole to talk to the butt professor? Butts are only supposed to have one of those, which is a natural law, but also completely plausible that one could have multiple of them, which they absolutely have. See how that is? Just because something is the usual doesn't mean that it can't also be different. Ultimately, the universe is under no obligation to do anything the way we expect it to.
So how did that happen?
Well, my friends, clearly something circumvented the natural law.
Clearly is a very funny way of saying, I'm making this shit up as I go. When if you were the real scientist you are pretending to be, if you thought that the physical laws as we understand them appeared to be being broken, you wouldn't just decide you knew exactly why that was. You would in fact say, that's odd. Clearly I/we are missing something. Let's do more science at it. But since you are obviously an apologist dipshit, you already know the answer that you want it to be, so any apparent opportunity to say that exact thing you will take with both your weird, unsettling cartoon hands.
But what could circumvent a natural law of science?
Steve could. Steve is good at that. You give Steve any rule or law, and Steve is going to break that motherfucker in half. And not because Steve is some kind of supernatural entity, but because he just doesn't give a fuck what you want. He doesn't follow anyone's rules, not even his own, which is why he doesn't fly or kill people or do anything you would expect from someone who ignores every single law known to man, because that's exactly what they would expect him to do.
By definition, it had to be supernatural. That's right.
That's wrong, because by definition, that law doesn't give a shit where stuff came from. It doesn't say there was nothing, then there was something, and that stuff can't be created or destroyed. It only says the second part. The first part is just something that you made up and decided was true. And again, the second part is only true so far as we don't know any better. If one day we find out that it's actually totally possible to create and destroy stuff, then stuff coming from nothing becomes a lot more plausible.
This natural law tells us that a supernatural event has occurred.
No, it really fucking doesn't. You're just saying it does because you refuse to engage with any idea outside of God done it. If you ever, even for a moment, consider any other possibility, the supernatural things did the do idea immediately falls apart because you have to make so many goddamn assumptions for it to work that it's obvious that you haven't even tried to refute your desired outcome.
At some point, matter was created.
Care to fucking prove that? That's the problem with these kinds of ideas. They also assume that their starting point is what they need it to be for their thing to hold true. But that's not something you can possibly know, not to mention the assumption that this is the only universe that's ever been. Holding on the forever matter thing, what makes you think that the universe isn't some kind of self-perpetuating cosmic cycle? Or hell, even a God-perpetuating one. If there happens to be a God, there is no reason To think that this is the only time they have done a universe. Exactly how many important things have you done in your life that you've only ever done once? I'll bet it's not a lot. So multiple goes at the universe is not only plausible, but somewhat likely whatever way you look at it.
And when we follow the science, science points to an unnatural, supernatural starting cause.
What you are doing is anything but following the science. And, well, you are the but professor, so that stands to reason. None of what you have said is even remotely scientific, not only in that it just flies in the face of science by presuming that you can even science at the supernatural, but just from a basic stance. If you didn't know anything about what the science says, I mean, you obviously don't, but someone else who didn't know anything current research says about these things, they could use the scientific method against your claims, and they would not come away with the conclusion that supernatural thing must exist unless they were a colossal moron.
Hold on. Of course someone's going to argue against this logic, right?
How could they possibly do that? There would have to be any logic to argue against in the first place. You set of goddamn goons. Also, as I have said many times, logic, even if it's completely reasonable and all follows and all that good stuff, it is not the same thing as being factual. So yeah, of course someone can and will argue against your logic. Why the fuck wouldn't they?
Go ahead and try.
Tried and done, and wasn't even remotely difficult. You know, I'm starting to think that these idiots might not be very good at this, or smart, or capable of in-depth thought at all, and are ugly, hence needing to use the cartoons. No, I use a cartoon avatar to protect you from my handsomeness. Completely different. Anyway, let's see how their fake attempts at self-awareness completely fail. Spoilers.
Well, what if I say that law may be proven wrong one day?
Sure, maybe one day. But as of today, it is a law.
Are you taking the piss? So you agree that it could in fact be wrong, but because we don't know any better now, best to assume it's absolutely right and also proves God somehow, even though it absolutely fucking doesn't. Smart.
And it's considered one of the most foundational laws of physics.
So that argument's just avoiding today's scientific reality.
No, that argument is pointing out that even the most well-grounded science is still provisional, and that our understanding of the universe is only as good as our current knowledge base allows it to be. So making ultimate conclusions and definitive statements like there must be a supernatural force is an absolutely fucking absurd thing to do. The point is that science is flexible and changing and might not look the same in 10 years as it does today, as opposed to religions which tend to be rigid and unchanging and can never ever be wrong, so can never ever correct themselves when new facts are discovered, making them fucking useless for learning about the world.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And we've got to follow today's real science.
Off. If you guys followed real science, you wouldn't be spouting half the absolute garbage you have in this video. You would know and understand that you can't just decide the one and only conclusion that you want to be the case isn't the only possibility, and you would have some concept that the scientific understanding that you are pretending to be so in favor of isn't a set of strict rules that you absolutely have to follow, but simply the way we currently think things work.
I've heard people say that with quantum mechanics, virtual particles can pop out of nothing.
Holy fucking shit, why are there even more people? Is this just to try and make it look like Professor Anus is convincing so many fucking dickheads? I mean, good job, but a dickhead is still a dickhead. Also, yeah, virtual particles. They kind of shit all over the idea that something appearing from nothing out of nowhere is impossible when it very much appears to be happening.
Not a good argument. They're just referring to a subatomic observation where oppositely charged particles appear and then disappear from an already existing quantum energy field.
Well, the scale is completely fucking irrelevant. An apparently impossible thing happening, but it's really small so we can ignore it, is truly not a good argument. And while, again, you're confusing scientific nothing with nothing. A quantum field might be something, but much like if you were stood on a hockey field and a basketball appeared out of nowhere and bonked you on the head and then disappeared just as fast, that would appear to be something coming from nothing in that fucking field. The same is true for these virtual particles. They appear in a place, but they weren't there before, and then they promptly fuck off. But they are there, and they have measurable effects, so are both real and essentially appearing from nothing, so to speak.
Quantum physicists know that we have never seen matter come from nothing.
Well, that's just bollocks, and I think you know it, since I'm not just pulling this shit out of my ass, unlike you. No, I base the things I say off as best I can, because I'm still a dumb. But there do appear to be, in fact, plenty of physicists who say that there is a kind of nothing that is very much ready to produce stuff. And if that's possible, then what is God even good for? Less than nothing, apparently.
Never ever?
Never ever.
So does science really point to a supernatural event producing the matter of the universe?
No, and the only people who do are simply redefining science into a completely unrecognizable mess that doesn't produce useful answers, and instead only comfortable lies that make them feel more important than they very much aren't.
Yes, and there really is no serious scientific argument against this.
You know, apart from basically every last part of science ever.
Science really does point to a supernatural force.
So what do we call this force, Professor?
That is for each of you to decide. But whatever it is powerful and it is supernatural.
All right, fine, you got me. It's whiskey. Praise be to its golden glory.